Greetings and salutations, comrades. Hope this finds you well. Just this story, unfortunately, just another long line of many, infinitely, frankly, of the United States being the biggest purveyor of death and destruction all around the world, while they like to talk about, protecting human rights and democracy abroad. They do the exact opposite. They prop up the most repressive regimes as long as they're ready and willing to do the bidding of the U.S. empire. Venezuela is not one of those countries. They're seeking their own independent leftist socialist path where they're actually trying to look out for the best interest of the working class, of the vulnerable and marginalized there. And as a result, the people have paid a great price. And the sanctions that were placed on Venezuela under Trump have not been gotten rid of under Biden, not surprisingly. And under Trump, there was that report from I believe it's the Center for Economic and Policy Research showed that tens of thousands of people had already died, from these sanctions, and that's obviously a lot higher at this point. Now the U.S. has, kidnapped and I believe flown this Venezuelan diplomat back to the United States for the crime of trying to secure food for their country and different resources that the people desperately need, largely due to the disgusting, illegal, inhumane, just fucked up on every level unilateral sanctions that the United States has leveled on this country. And I'm obviously referencing Alex Saab here if you have not heard of that figure before. Obviously probably not going to be covered in mainstream media, and if it is, it's obviously going to be this guy, he was breaking all these laws, he's deserve it. Obviously not going to hear it from a anti-imperialist socialist lens. So that's why it's important to look at this. So Venezuelan diplomat kidnapped by the United States. This is from Kawasuchin News, probably mispronouncing that, let me know if I am. They're a great outlet. Ollie Vargas does excellent work. Is this from Ollie Vargas? Either way, there's let's see. Venezuelan diplomat kidnapped by the United States. The Venezuelan government has denounced the kidnapping of Venezuelan diplomat Alex Saab by the government of the U.S., aided by Cape Verdean authorities, who tortured Saab and kept him arbitrarily in prison for 491 days without arrest order, without due process, a violation of the laws of Cape Verde and the Vienna Convention, a crime which has been condemned by the United Nations and countries all over the world. Statement published on Saturday by the Venezuelan foreign minister confirms report of the extradition of Saab to the United States from Cape Verde. Again, this is just another disgusting example of how Biden's foreign policy is just Trump 2.0, and that obviously has hugely disastrous consequences for people in the global south, people in Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, North Korea, Syria, Iran, etc., etc. The Bolivarian government has also announced the suspension of its participation in dialogue with the opposition, which is being held in Mexico. Head of the government delegation and president of the National Assembly of Venezuela, Jorge Rodriguez, announced that the delegation will not be attending the round scheduled for Sunday. Alex Saab, look at this, permanent representative of the Bolivarian government at the Mexico talks with representatives of the extremist opposition sectors, facilitated by the King of Norway and accompanied by Russia and the Netherlands. In its communique, the Venezuelan government repudiates a serious violation of human rights against the Venezuelan citizen and diplomat. Quote, acts that set a dangerous precedent for international law. I agree, but the United States supposedly is this purveyor of, rules and democracy and, following international law, when in fact the complete opposite is true, obviously, if you actually look at what they do in practice and not the lofty rhetoric that they use, right? Quote, we hold authorities at Cape Verde and the government President Biden responsive for the life and physical integrity of Alex Saab, and as a sovereign nation reserve the right to take actions accordingly, 100%. This is a act of aggression. It's fucking disgusting, and just adding insult to injury with these murderous sanctions that have been placed on Venezuela under Trump and have continued under Biden, again, simply for the fact that Venezuela wants to chart its own course. They don't want to be a puppet of the US empire. They actually want to try to improve the material conditions of the working class, of the most vulnerable, marginalized in Venezuela. Obviously, the US empire can't handle that. That's why they go after all of these independent, these socialist, these leftist countries all over the world, because, well, if you don't, do the bidding of the US empire, then you're going to pay for it dearly. Like, we're going to try to kill as many people as we can. We're going to try to sanction you to death. We're going to try to make life so miserable that we'll have an outcome that we like. This is the type of just disgusting psychology that infests, people within the U.S. government, both Democrat and Republican. That's why, and again, it's just a byproduct of capitalism, looking for new markets, new peoples, new places, new resources to be able to, exploit for profit. Right? You got to look for those new markets. The statement ends by expressing appreciation for the solidarity of the people of Cape Verde and the community of African countries, as well as organizations in the U.S. and world, which have raised their voice in repudiation of this crime. The struggle for the dignity of this innocent man who is protected by international law continues and intensifies. Fucking disgusting. Disgusting on every level. That, again, another reason why I think it's so problematic when people on the left, when so-called socialists or communists, like to talk about being American patriots or having the, American flag in their background or draping themselves in it, a la, Peter Coffin. It's like, this is what the fucking American flag represents to so many people around the world. It represents death, kidnapping, torture, sanctions, regime change, occupations, propping up brutal dictatorships, etc., not to mention what it means to people within, the imperial core here in the United States. And I'll end it after sharing this tweet by Dan Cohen. I think he had a really good take on this, and so I wanted to highlight it. The U.S. empire is so committed to starving Venezuelans to death that they abducted a foreign diplomat whose job was to procure food and medicine. Let's read that once again. The U.S. empire is so committed to starving Venezuelans to death that they abducted a foreign diplomat whose job was to procure food and medicine. Just how fucking just disgusting on every fucking level, right? Now, Alex Saab will face a kangaroo court and likely rot in prison for helping a country survive the devastation of U.S. sanctions. Jesus fucking Christ, dude. So disgusting. Painfully ironic, the U.S. is charging Saab with money laundering after Washington stole hundreds of millions of dollars from Venezuela and used it to build a border wall. Oh, fucking A, man. Fucking A. Man, it's just, again, just example after infinite example of the United States just being the biggest purveyor of death and destruction all around the world. They like to, U.S. leaders, U.S. diplomats, people in government like to talk about, protecting human rights and democracy, while the U.S. fucking kidnaps this Venezuelan diplomat, Alex Saab, for the crime of trying to procure medicine and food for his country, which is facing just horrible conditions due to U.S. fucking sanctions. I mean, fuck. Quick shout out to the two Uber comrades supporting my channel, this content and Patreon, my partner, and Independent Left News. Definitely check out Independent Left News. Like the video if you like the damn video. Subscribe for more content. And sooner the U.S. empire withers away into history, the better it will be for, the working class, both internationally and obviously here in the imperial core. So